Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of WeAreSC.com's Inside the Trojan Huddle. Welcome to Trojan fans who are excited for a win this week. I suppose welcome to Washington fans, since you're one of our longest rivals if you're checking in. And OU fans. Apparently there are some. Last week I made fun of you guys saying you weren't around anymore, and then I got a bunch of comments saying yes we are. So congratulations to OU on your moral victory this week. And glad to have you around. Look, there's no reason we have to be enemies. Think about it. These guys have gone through the Alex Grinch experience just like we have. I mean, they understand where we've been. I get it. So they were a 20-point dog and they covered. So congratulations, guys. That's good. Okay, so USC finally got a win. It was against Rutgers, which is usually not the sort of thing that would send us all into doing jumpy jacks. And I'll be honest, I didn't do any, but mentally I was pleased because I didn't know it was going to happen. So let's start with this. Let's have your big picture thoughts on the Rutgers game. Eric, start us off this week.
The big picture thought is that USC could win a game without tripping over themselves. And there's not a ton to take, but that is a thing to take. The idea of, when's the other shoe going to drop when Rutgers brings it back within 8? How are we going to trip and fall and fumble this ball backwards 30 yards and Rutgers picks it up and scores? To not see that happen, to make the play, to make an explosive play in a really quick response type of thing. I think there's positives that you can take from offense when you're doing that. From on the defensive side, I think that's more about the big picture stuff. Like you hope to get all those guys back in the secondary, at least for some of these games at the end. I don't really care that it was Rutgers. I don't really care that this schedule for them was, I mean, horrific to make them play that game under those circumstances. That's a college football program with a really good running back, a quarterback who can throw it a bit. So there's some guys, a good offensive line. To do what USC did defensively, holding them to 20 points with the guys who were out, I think that's good. I think that's a good sort of statement from a lot of the backups where you can really rely on some of these guys going forward.
Mark, what do you think?
Yeah, I echo a lot of what Eric just said. It's a grain of salt type of win. It's Rutgers. Obviously, USC plays much better at home offensively, that's for sure. I won't say they were mistake free, but they were pretty close. It was nice to see all three facets of the offense kind of working together for once. The offensive line keeping Miller Morris's uniform clean. Woody Marks is running the ball like he's back in high school, scoring 3 touchdowns. You talked about explosive plays, Makai Lemon. Look, if USC can build off of this win and win on the road this week, it's a momentum changer. That's how you look at the big picture. USC came home. They figured out how to put those tough losses behind them, win against a team they should beat, look pretty good doing it at the same time, and then follow that up with win on the road against one of their more traditional rivals, old Pac-10, Pac-12 foe. Big picture, look, they beat Rutgers. They should have. And they did it with a bunch of guys on the defensive side of the ball that they weren't playing in game 1. They weren't playing in game 2 unless it was the end of the game. So you try and get some stuff off of film, and you hope that these younger guys can build off it because they are the future and they're going to see more playing time. I was interested in the snap count that Eric put together the other day. A lot of the younger guys on the defense side of the ball, their snap counts jumped significantly. There was one guy who usually gets a lot of reps who didn't get a lot of reps, and that was on the defensive line, Jamil Muhammad. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about this during the show, but big picture, I think it's that they turn the page. They're ready to go with the youth movement, so to speak. And they saw enough that you're probably going to see more of that over these next 4 regular season games.
Yeah, we'll talk about some individual components of the game in a bit. So I'll keep my comments high level. There's no such thing as a gimme game for USC these days. I mean, they've self-destructed so many times this year that there's no game you go into and say, okay, we don't have to worry about this one. There have always been those games in the past. Even last year, there were a whole series of them at the beginning of the year. We said, I don't think. I mean, if USC's bus doesn't, miss the stadium, I don't see any way you can lose this game. But right now, there's no such game. Rutgers isn't a great football team, but as Eric pointed out, they have some pieces. They can do some things. They have a good coach. They're a team that likes to be physical, and so USC trotted out a team that had self-destructed and really already thrown away most of their team goals. And then they throw out a defense that's lacking the entire secondary and their best linebacker and their most talented defensive lineman who decided that he would just stop playing a few weeks ago. You look at all that, and any win's a good win, and that was a good win. It was a very solid and decisive victory, which they needed, and I think the defense showed a lot of guts. We'll talk about the defense more in a minute, so I'm not gonna step on those answers. But I thought the defense showed some guts, and so they did what they needed to do. They avoided what would have been a catastrophic loss, right? I mean, we've had a few of those already this year, but things can always get worse. People say, can things really get worse? The answer is yes, they always can. They could have gotten much worse with a loss to that Rutgers team. I can't imagine the state of the program had they done that. But they didn't. They went out, they took care of business. It helped that Rutgers let USC do what they do best offensively, which is throw short and intermediate routes and let guys run after the catch. I mean, if you're going to do that, you're helping USC a great deal. And so thank you to Greg Schiano, who probably had his own reasons for doing it. He probably didn't trust his secondary any more than I think Danton Lynn trusted USC's this week, which we'll talk about in a minute. So good win. It keeps things on track. It keeps alive the possibility that USC can finish on a long winning streak and have a huge win against Notre Dame when everybody will be watching. It keeps that alive. That's what they needed to do. Here's a more interesting question, I think. Is this offensive line getting better? I mean, the offensive line, we've been beaten up on this O-line for most of the year, apart from the first two games. And I think for good reason. But are they getting better? They certainly played their best game of the year Saturday. Mark, what do you think? Is the O-line coming around? Because if the O-line's coming around, we have a chance to do some stuff here. Mark is so befuddled by that.
I want to say yes.
Okay.
I
want to say yes
one
too.
of us is having technical.
I think it's you because I can still see Eric moving.
Eric? All right. Let me, I don't, can you hear me now? Hello.
Yeah, you're a little fuzzy, but we can hear you. So go ahead.
All right. So I think the offensive line is getting better. They were able to pass protect. They kept Miller Moss's uniform clean. No sacks given up. As I mentioned, Woody Marks, they didn't run the ball as much as I thought they should have, but they ran the ball well. They were really productive. You had four rushing touchdowns. Miller Moss able to stand behind the line, pick out his receiver. We haven't seen that a lot this year. So you take into account who they were playing. It was Rutgers, not the greatest defensive line, but they do enough to make you think about them. I don't know if they're better yet. We're going to find out on the road. Washington has a good defense, especially when you look at their passing defense. They're number one in the country. How much of that is because they get into the backfield, and how much of that is because the secondary just doesn't let guys get open? I guess we're going to find out in a few days. We have to just say they're getting better based on this last performance, but we don't have anything really to judge it upon. They're not going into their bench. They're using the same guys. So Elijah Page, 2 games in a row now, he's looked better. You had nothing to complain about on the right side of the line. if you're not calling out players and complaining, especially when you're talking about the guys up front, that's a job well done. So that's all I can say about him right now. I have to see them do it 2 games in a row where the running game looks good, the pass protection looks good, and Miller Moss isn't panicking back there because he thinks he's hearing footsteps. If that happens 2 games in a row, the answer to your question is, yeah, they're getting better.
All right, Eric, let me ask it this way. What is your level of confidence? 1 being none at all, 5 being absolute confidence that this group is getting better and will continue to play well the rest of the season?
2.5, 2.5, almost 3, because I think
Okay.
you still have a good Notre Dame defensive front waiting at the end. And I think that I don't think we're going to see a Michigan, but I think you could get some of those, Wisconsin, Minnesota-ish type plays in there, and you just can't have those. So am I confident that we're not going to see just a straight bust rush through the A gap or B gap where nobody picks a guy up and Miller Moss gets hit? I think one of those could still happen. It's undeniable that they're playing better. They're getting out in space. They're putting hats on guys. They're creating running lanes. It feels like there's more confidence with how they're playing. There's much less like jittery sort of half steps and false starts and things like that. Playing at home against Rutgers, a team that may or may not have been awake for parts of that game. I don't think like Mark sort of alluded to, I don't think you can sit here and say, that was a dominant showing against a really tough opponent. But you beat the teams that line up ahead of you, and USC's offensive line played much better than Rutgers' defensive front in that game. And so if that's what you have to go on in that game, you have to say that they did really well. You see the pressure numbers on the quarterback really shrink down. There wasn't, at least from what I can remember, there weren't plays in that one where you just had a guy completely unblocked off the edge or ran through somewhere where, how did they miss that guy? How did they not communicate there? So I think there is a lot more confidence in that group and from that group and how they're playing. I think that they're going to go to Washington with a lot of confidence. Mark is right too in saying, let's see how they play there, because this is a 4-4 Washington team. Are you gonna get the atmosphere that you could have gotten with a 7-1, 8-0 Washington team in Washington team in Husky Stadium? Maybe not, but it's still USC going in there, and fans are still going to show up. And if any number of fans shows up, that's a loud, tough environment to play in. So this will be a test. I don't know. I don't know if it gets like Michigan Stadium, but this will be a challenge.
Yeah, I mean, that's over the last couple of weeks, and certainly this past week, you had a lot less of just the disastrous missed blocks, right? The plays where you just stare at the field like I can't believe I'm watching this. Nobody touched that guy. You've had a lot less of that. And if they continue to give less of that, then USC's offense is going to be in an okay position. It's not going to be a dominant offensive line ever, not this year. They're not that good. What you want is you want them not to absolutely blow up drives and blow up games by doing something just horrifically bad. And they've avoided that. But you're right. It's a different story playing on the road, and we'll talk about that a little bit more when we're talking about the keys to beating Washington. But this offensive line on the road, this offense on the road, has been a mess. So this is a gigantic challenge. If you look at the schedule going forward, I think Nebraska is a team that can beat USC. But Nebraska at home is also a game that you think, okay, that Nebraska is probably a little if not for the fact they played Ohio State close this week, you would say Nebraska looks like it's kind of like Wisconsin, but a lesser team, right? That's a team that they should be able to handle. UCLA is a disaster. It's a rivalry game. It's a game they should be able to handle. But Washington's one that worries me a lot, and it's not necessarily because Washington's great, but that's a tough place to play. So we'll see. But we've been saying all along, if these guys can just play to a draw, then USC will be okay. And they did a lot more than that against Rutgers. They outplayed Rutgers front seven. So if they do that, then you'll get 6 touchdowns and 8 drives like you had Saturday. That's what you want out of. Okay. Still have some big games on the schedule. That means that you probably need some tickets. If you're not getting out to the Coliseum, despite the fact that the team's 4-4, it's still a good time. Historic venue, the Spirit of Troy marching band, the DJ, if you're into that sort of thing. Of course, we've complained about that, but he does some nice things. If you want to get out to one of these USC games, he does, Mark. He sometimes gets the fans screaming. Don't give me that look. It's too early for that. Look, if you want to get to the games, you need to get over. You need to download the Game Time app. They're going to have good prices. They're going to have good availability. They're going to give you a $20 discount on your first order if you put in on3 as your coupon code, ON and the number 3. So go out and do it. Make it a twofer. Go see USC and then see the Rams the following day, or the Chargers the following day when those teams are home. I haven't looked at the schedule to know what the availability is. You can do that. You can do that on the Game Time app. Just go do it. GameTime.co if you're on the laptop. But good product, good price. Get out to some of these games. You'll be happy you did, especially that last one, because they're going to beat the Irish and knock them out of the playoffs. Okay, guys. I want to talk about the defensive unit, because that was a defense that gave up some yards Saturday. Gave a lot of passing yards to a Rutgers team that doesn't throw the ball particularly well. It's also a defensive unit that looked absolutely nothing like the team they put on the field against LSU, right? It looked like the backups for the LSU game for the most part. So what do we make of that defensive performance? You tell me, Mark. How do you feel about the defense and what you saw on the field Saturday against Rutgers?
So I'm at the point right now where it's like, let youth be served. Just go out there, let these young guys figure it out, have fun. You're playing for the spoiler against Notre Dame, beating UCLA, representing yourself well at home against Nebraska. And obviously you want to win this weekend on the road at Washington. But right now you're playing with a pretty depleted secondary, right? Your starters were missing, even some of the backups were missing. And thankfully, Rutgers quarterback threw the worst pass I'd ever seen a quarterback throw to a guy wide open down the middle of the field. Otherwise, he had a nice touchdown pass right there. The guy was wide open. I like what I see up front, though. Cameron Fountain, literally, he played 35, 37 snaps, productive. He got a sack. He got some quarterback pressures. Sam Green, they're turning him loose, and he had a sack. He's creating some quarterback pressures. These are first and second year players. Elijah Hughes wasn't used for the first 4, 5, 6 games. All of a sudden, you get him in these last couple of games. He's playing with that motor that we saw him play as a freshman last year. So look, at this point, I like what I see at the first level. Linebackers, you don't have a lot of choice there, but I'm not sure why Desmond Stevens didn't see more action, why Easton Mascarenas-Arnold is playing 90 snaps, why Mason Cobb is playing 86 snaps. That's a lot to play at linebacker. I don't care who you're playing. That's a lot of snaps to play at linebacker. So you've got the younger guys, use them, get them ready for the rest of the season, the bowl game, and getting them ready for 2025, because that's what you're playing for right now, if you're being realistic. You're not playing for the Rose Bowl. You're not playing for the playoffs. Let's play for the future. So I like what I see when they're in there, when they get their opportunity to play. I think it's probably time to get them involved even more. The passing defense, though, yeah, that's a little scary. We'll see what happens in Seattle this weekend. Will Rogers plays much better at home than he does on the road. His numbers just bear that out. So we'll see. I like what I see because I like what Lynn has brought with his scheme, the effort that they're bringing. I mean, look, Gavin Meyer is out there with a giant club on one hand and a giant knee brace on the same elbow on the same arm. And he's almost out there blocking kicks. He's creating pressure. What's not to like about the defense? They're giving you everything you were hoping for this year. They're holding teams to 20, 21 points per game. And if Lincoln Riley's offense would just do what they did against Rutgers, all of us would probably be in a much better mood as this season is going.
Yeah, Eric, what do you think? How did you feel about that defensive performance?
I thought it was good. When you're playing with a depleted roster, you got to pick and choose, I think. If you're not comfortable saying, hey, we can go out and just take everything away from you, Kyle Monangai was not going to beat USC that night. And if you sat back there and just said, we're gonna take away the pass and play shell like that, he would have been able to. I think if your bet was, we don't think Ethan Kaliakmanis can make every throw. We don't think he's gonna throw for 475 yards and 6 touchdowns in this game. And that's what you bet on, and you take away the run, I think you're fine. And that's what happened. Did he make a ton of throws? Yes. Did he make the game-winning throws? No. And so if that was your bet, you bet right. And I think that's you don't crush them for, how come the corners weren't up? How come they weren't driving on the ball? How come they weren't stepping in front of those passes on the outside? Because he had to make 10, he had to complete 10 passes to score any kind of touchdown or get into field goal range. And I think that was the game plan, and that's how you saw that go. Is that going to win every game? No. No, because you're going to get quarterbacks that can throw for 500 yards and 6 touchdowns, and they're going to be just fine doing that against you. But in that one, with what you had available, to get the quarterback pressure that you did while also mostly taking away the running game for 4 quarters, I think that's a good look. Can guys who are on that sort of slot receiver running it out, can they drive faster and make better individual plays? Probably. Yeah, I think there's some of that in there. But if you give me a team that's going to play hard against the run and shut down a good running back, I'll take whatever happens in that game.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with all that. What you want from a defense is you want to keep the other team from scoring, right? Fundamentally, that's not the greatest insight ever, but if you judge USC by that metric, defense has been pretty good all year, and especially when if you have 4 backups in your secondary and a good running back on the other side, what you want to do is stop the running game and don't give them anything cheap in the pass game. That's what you want to do. Keep them in front and assume that when you get into the red zone and the field shrinks, it's going to be much more difficult to throw the ball, and you're going to hold them to 3. Maybe you'll get a holding penalty along the way and kill the drive. It's the right strategy with that group on the field. And it was nice to see the younger guys play pretty well. Mark mentioned 3 guys that are younger guys who I thought did some things that we hadn't seen much of this year, including getting pressure off the edge, which has been a gigantic problem. Anthony Lucas was getting some pressure off the edge when he was in. He wasn't getting big numbers, but he was causing problems for people. But without him, there's been very little of that, and some of the young guys actually looked pretty good. Sam Green, who you thought was completely buried on the depth chart earlier in the season, actually looks like he can play a little bit, and probably should be playing a little bit more. Probably will be playing a little bit more. So it's hard not to feel good about that. USC's not immensely talented defensively. They have some good players, but you don't look at that defense and say, okay, these 3 guys are going to go on the first day of the NFL draft. That's not happening with this unit. That's just not. You don't even look at it and say, at least with the upperclassmen, these are guys that have first or second round talent. That's not really what you have. You have some good football players who don't have that level of ability. And so if you're Lincoln Riley, what you really want is for these guys to not give up many points and be good on third down and get teams off the field. Prior to the Rutgers game, USC was fantastic getting people off the field on third down. Not as much on fourth, but on third down they were great. They weren't great against Rutgers, but I think that's the nature of the defensive game plan. Keep people in front. Don't give them anything cheap. They still almost gave up some things cheap, right? I mean, Mark mentioned one of them. If your whole game plan is keeping people in front of you, you need to keep people in front of you. But they did that for the most part. So I feel pretty good about that. If you look at in some ways, Rutgers shows what the season would look like if a typical Lincoln Riley offense had shown up this year, right? You play pretty good defense. You're not going to dominate anybody, but you keep them out of the end zone for the most part. You keep the score down to a manageable level, and then if the offense does what you expect a Lincoln Riley offense to do, you win the game relatively easily, right? That's how it should have gone all year. You have a little bit of a broken offense this year. I'm going to give you some stats. For people who like stats, listen up. If you don't like stats, then just skip ahead 15 seconds. I looked up points per play for USC, actually for Lincoln Riley, going back to his last 5 years at OU and his first 3 years at SC. Listen to these ranks in points per play. Second, first, fifth, seventh, sixth, second, 33rd. That's the story of USC's season. We've been saying for a long time, if USC just puts a competent defense on the field, they're going to be in good shape. USC is managing to put a competent defense on the field, even when they're doing it with duct tape, right? I mean, that's what we saw Saturday. That was the duct tape unit. They kept people out of the end zone. They gave the offense a chance, and when the offense performed, they're fine. So I feel good about the defense, not because the numbers are great, but because I don't care about the numbers being great when you're in that situation with all those backups playing. Just give the offense a chance to win the game, and they did. We'll see whether they can do that on the road. Talk about that in a minute.
There was no drop off in their physicality either, and that was what was really impressive when you were watching them play. Mason Cobb and Meyer teamed up on Monangai one play that I don't know how he got up off the turf, but he did.
Cobb had a couple of big hits in that game, and he wasn't alone. That was the defense brought it, right? They were attacking, and I thought both sides actually. I thought USC was more physical on both sides of the ball, which is nice. When USC's playing like that, they're somewhat difficult to beat. You have to be pretty good to beat them. Okay, I've got a question. This is more of an offensive question. And I think our answer might have been different a few weeks ago than it would be now. So here it is. When USC needs a big play, who's the guy right now? Eric, who's the guy right now if you need a big play?
Nobody.
That answer's terrible. That's really depressing.
But that's the conversation. Yeah. But that's the conversation about this offense. And Lincoln Riley talked about that early this week where he was asked, and he's been asked about it kind of throughout the season. USC fans are very familiar, very comfortable with who's our guy this year at wide receiver. And everyone kind of takes their turn. You churn through guys. And that's why when you look at the NFL right now, there's a USC guy, there's a USC guy, there's a USC guy. Like there are wide receivers from USC coming out all the time, every year. And so Lincoln Riley has been asked a few times, like, are you okay not having a clear number one? And he talks about, I think it's harder. I think it can be harder to defend when you're set up like this, when there's 4 guys, 5 guys running around, and you create matchup problems from sideline to sideline, from line of scrimmage to 25 yards down the field. And that's tougher to defend. That's kind of the conversation of what's going on with this offense, because when you need a play, when you need something, who do you know as a receiver? Who do you know is going to beat their guy? Who do you know is going to be open? And I don't know if you have that right now. And maybe Makai's that guy, right? He got hurt against Michigan, missed a game, slowly coming back into it, made two big plays, and honestly a third catch that was just as impressive as the two with that had the long runs at the end of it. But are we seeing what we've become sort of accustomed to? Are we seeing that big physical wide receiver just run kind of a quick post, put himself between the corner and the quarterback and throw it up to him and he goes up and catches it like we saw big receivers for years and years and years do that? There doesn't seem to be a reliance or a push to let those guys kind of make those plays. It's more, let's just run the play. Miller's got to sort of scan everything and find the guy who's open. So I do think that in part of this, when you're talking about points per play and all of that, I think settling into this offense, this style where you don't just say, hey, I know that guy's going to beat this guy, I'm throwing it to him. I think that has held them back a bit. And now going forward, if you have all your guys now and you're comfortable and you run like this and you put points up, every week, then hey, great, that works. But if you have a guy drop a couple or you have a guy who's off, or if a team really can sort of sit in that umbrella and take everybody away, it gets much more complicated. So who am I throwing it to? Makai Lemon right now. Who is it for USC? I don't think that they go in saying, "Hey, here's our guy. Here's who's going to make a big play for us," and we know it's coming every time we need it.
Mark, what do you think? Who's the guy when you need a big play on this offense?
So I guess Eric has no respect for Woody Marks, but I think he's probably the closest that USC has right now to say, hey, you know what? If we hand him the ball, he's going to pick up the yards we need. If we throw him the ball out in open space, he can pick up the yards we need. He's probably the closest guy you have if you want to say, your big player. But Makai's coming on. I mean, 256 all-purpose yards. He's shown that he's willing to return the kicks. He definitely is, despite his size, he's probably the most physical wide receiver on the roster right now. He doesn't shy away from contact. He doesn't use his body like Deuce Robinson should, but he knows how to run routes. And if you hit him in stride, he showed what he can do. So yeah, Eric is right. There's no superstar, must get the ball in this guy's hands player on the roster right now. But I think if we're answering the question, it's probably Woody Marks. I mean, he's 245 yards from hitting that 1,000-yard, rushing plateau. I think he's going to crash right through that. Chris, you talked about it on the last question. The offense hasn't done what it's supposed to do this year, and had it, we're talking about a different season right now. How much of that is due to the youth at the wide receiver group? I don't know. I think it starts up front with the offensive line. That's where it's all started and stopped.
Yeah. Well, I think there's, for what it's worth, I think there's plenty of blame to go around when you ask why this offense hasn't been as good. The offensive line has been subpar. Miller Moss has probably been Lincoln Riley's worst starting quarterback. The sophomore wide receivers have not been consistent. I mean, there are all kinds of reasons why. They say if you have two quarterbacks, that probably means you don't have any quarterbacks. And with the exception of maybe the 49ers and the 80s and a few teams, that's usually the case. In this particular situation, if you have a bunch of guys who you say are capable of being the guy, it's probably because you don't really have anybody who's yet ready to step into that role. And if you think about the guys USC's had in the past, Keyshawn Johnson or Reggie Bush or Marquise Lee or other guys who had at least a season where when you needed a big play, when you needed a guy to get a 60-yard touchdown, you could look to those guys. When you needed a guy, when you had a 3rd and 9 and you absolutely had to get the 3rd and 9, you knew you could throw it to Keyshawn and he'd catch it, right? You knew that. It was a given. USC just doesn't have that right now. And all the usual names came out. Makai Lemon looked like he may turn into that guy soon. I hope so. Woody Marks has been fantastic all year. I don't know that he's been a big play back as much as he's been a very solid and dependable back who is elusive and can get you an 18-yard play. He's not getting you 80-yard plays very often, ever, like Reggie would do. But there was a time when Jacoby Lane looked like he may turn into that guy, but none of them have really done it on a consistent basis. So I guess we still don't know the answer to that. I hope Mekhi Lemon becomes the guy just because somebody needs to do it. And when Lincoln Riley says, it may be harder to defend all these guys. Yeah, okay, fine. But that's never really true. It's always harder to defend a guy who is an absolute monster who nobody can match up with. That's always harder. When Michael Jordan leaves the NBA, even if the Bulls got a bunch of above average players and they all scored 13 points a game, nobody could really say, well, it's a lot harder now because we don't know who's going to take the shot. No, it was a lot harder when Michael had the ball and he just shot a fadeaway over 3 guys and scored. That was harder. So that's just not true. That's Lincoln Riley trying to put some spin on it. So we'll see. The fundamental problem is, Lincoln's talked about separation this year. He's been talking about in terms of the team separating from the other team, so you're not in a close game. USC's had some separation issues on offense. They have a bunch of guys who I think are immensely talented, especially at wide receiver. You'd like to see those guys take a step forward and really separate from everybody else. I just don't know that it's happened yet. Maybe Lemon, but that's one game. So I don't know what to make of it yet.
The separation thing, and I don't want to tangent into a separate show that we could, I think, do on this, but that has become kind of an issue too, I think. This sort of emphasis on we're not really playing well, we're not really winning unless we go run away and win by 3 touchdowns and win by 4 touchdowns. And when you find yourself in a game where that's not happening, are you getting frustrated by that? Or are you playing the game that's in front of you right now? And hey, maybe we need to win this one 21-20, 24-21, something like that. And are you comfortable in those games? And everything about this season feels silly talking when you have the LSU game at the beginning of the year. I mean, that LSU game, what went right in that one and what USC did in that one is just alien compared to what has happened in almost every other game. It makes no sense that that game was in this season and that you thought it would set up for, hey, that's who they are. That's what they're going to be. They can win those games, and then no, and then no, and no, and no 4 times. So that's such a weird sort of disconnect with that game because they didn't separate and they were comfortable in that and they made the plays at the end when it mattered. And so the emphasis on we have to separate, we have to go run out by 3 touchdowns. It's interesting to me that it keeps getting brought up when I'm sure, the Big Ten has games where that happens, 52-13, and you just run away from a team. But there seems like so many games there at 27-24, right? Like down to the wire. Can you make plays at the end when you didn't separate? And I think that's what we might find out from this team, because nothing about going to Washington right now says you're going to run away from that team and that environment with what they can do well. Even Nebraska coming in has played for the most part, outside of getting just run over by Indiana. But that Ohio State game, right? Ohio State needed to make plays and find a way. So that's interesting to me, kind of going forward this season and just Big Ten life.
Well, Eric, you actually graded this after the last game. How much of this is really part of the officiating that's keeping these games close? You just mentioned the Nebraska-Ohio State game. It's not just a USC thing. The officiating it's almost to the point of we got to keep these games close. We got to keep everybody's interest watching these. It's what the freak is going on? Because some of these calls, and I know we're going to talk about it, with one of these next questions, but man, it's hard. It's difficult.
Yeah. We are going to talk about the officiating because I usually don't like talking about officiating, but it's gotten to the point where you almost can't avoid it. But I will say this about the separation thing. My concern, Lincoln Riley's right that if you play a bunch of close games, you're probably going to lose close to half of them. That's true. My problem with this talking point is that it sort of inverts the way you want players to be thinking about the game. Usually you don't focus on the big picture results. You focus play by play, doing your assignment and getting the little things right. And so this talk about separating seems to be the opposite of that. And so I'm not sure why that focus, but maybe that's just a talking point for the fans and the media. Maybe that's not what they're actually talking about inside. I have no idea. I know this, that part of what Lincoln Riley is concerned about, I think, is that USC needs to look better when they play. Mark said, we're playing for the future. That's true. But one of the things they're playing for is to save what looks like a pretty good recruiting class. And you have to give those guys hope that USC is on a trajectory where when they get here, that they're going to win and they're going to be coached well and they're going to play in big games. And so part of the concern is that not only does USC have 4 losses, but the more games you play where you just look like garbage, the harder it is to sell that story to recruits. And you can't afford to have this class blow up. We talked about it last week. I don't want to get into it again. You can't afford that. At this point, you can't afford it. You have to score with this class. Okay. We've all seen the ridiculous product warnings where they tell people, don't stare right in the barrel of this gun, right? They put these warnings on it because of litigators like me causing problems for all of America. And I've always wondered, who in the world are they making these warnings for? Now we know it's Big Ten officials who probably, without those warnings, would be. I don't know how Big Ten officials aren't just taking plastic bags and like pulling them over their own heads and suffocating themselves because they seem so unbelievably inept. We saw it again this past week, multiple times, but what gets me is not the call in the moment. Those are bad enough. But when you go to the replay booth and you overturn a call with absolutely no basis for overturning that call. Zachariah Branch has been struggling all year. The guy finally gets a touchdown. It should have been an easy touchdown. It wasn't because the ball's a little bit behind him. He has to make the play. He has to go up in the air. There's nothing about that play that would suggest you should overturn it, and they overturn it. At this point, I don't really understand what's going on. Mark, what in the world is going on? How can it be that Big Ten officials are a giant step down from what we lived with in the Pac-12? I don't get it.
Hashtag, I miss the Pac-12 refs. I mean, we used to complain about them because they threw so many flags during the game. We're complaining now because they're not throwing flags. And as you just said, it's the replay officials that they're creating new rules as they go along. It's the Paul D philosophy. Well, USC should have better compliance because high-profile athletes. It's that type of stuff that's going on. That Zachariah Branch touchdown, they overturned it. Why? I still don't know. It's the replay against Michigan where they gave him the touchdown. I just mentioned the Ohio State-Nebraska game. How many times can you say, I'm going to make our conference look worse than it did the week before? They're finding new ways.
Eric, you must be really excited about the officiating we're seeing in the Big Ten. What do you think? You're going to give some words of support to the job they're doing?
I still think that everyone has always disliked the officiating in their conference. The SEC fans do not like SEC officiating. Big Ten fans never liked Big Ten officiating. Pac-12 fans never liked Pac-12 officiating. The Pac-12 was the worst conference in branding and messaging, and they let it turn into a joke nationally, where these other conferences just said, no, it's because we love football and because we're good at it. So now we're getting to see, like, this is some of what it's been the whole time. Now, does that excuse just horrific decisions? No. And the worst thing is that they're letting a lot of stuff go in real time because it's tough to catch, because it's bang bang, because is that holding or a block? I don't know, but let's let the play go. And you've seen the play that they let go as a fumble and then had to call back when the guy he threw it 20 yards downfield, and they're letting that go as a fumble when it's clear as anything that that's an incomplete pass. So you let the stuff go. You let them sort of go over the line a little bit on holding and pass interference and all of that stuff. And then you get to the replay and you're just going down to the tiniest little fraction of nothing to overturn stuff and whatever and take away sort of the on that branch touchdown, the actual sort of momentum of falling to the ground. And does he have the ball? Yes. Yes. I think there's so much in the replay of just looking at the tiniest little thing where you've let the game sort of run and kind of free flow the whole time. So yeah, it's the decisions that sort of go against and back and forth with how they're letting the game run. But USC has had two replay decisions now that are not unprecedented. We've seen some horrible replay overturns and targeting calls and all that stuff. But those are two really, really bad ones. And Nebraska head coach Matt Rule, right? He said earlier this week, like, tired of getting apologies, basically. And you've heard coaches say that, right? Stop telling me how you got it wrong. Stop getting it wrong. And I think USC is probably in that space right now where that's the feeling about a lot of these.
Probably.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, look, I don't know if you have a training problem, if you have a personnel problem on the field, probably both. I know this. There needs to be some accountability with the Big Ten over this. The Big Ten is one of the two conferences who now dominates college football. Those two conferences have the most passionate fan bases, the best programs that make the most money. It's inexcusable to have this level of officiating in a conference like that. It's absolutely inexcusable. And I don't know this for sure, but I look at who the Big Ten has put in charge of officials, and there's nothing in this person's background to suggest that she's ever done anything related to this. I mean, her bio says that she served as the administrative assistant to men's basketball for 9 years. Then she was involved in building services. Prior to that, she was doing human resources. What? I'm sure she's a very nice, competent person in all kinds of areas. There's nothing in that bio that suggests that she knows anything about officiating, and there's nothing on the field to suggest that the Big Ten has anybody in charge who understands anything about officiating. And at some point, you have to remove the Alex Grinch from your program. The Big Ten needs to remove its officiating Alex Grinch from the conference. This is just, or we need to see a dramatic turnaround when they recognize that they have a problem and they need to fix it. But it's not just USC, although it affects every single USC game. But it is just horrific conference-wide on a weekly basis, and it's just unacceptable. This is a professional sports league that makes a fortune, right? These conference teams generate well over $1 billion every year in football revenue. Why are we putting up with this Mickey Mouse joke of an officiating program? I don't get it.
How long has she been in charge of the big conference officiating?
It looks like since 22.
Mm.
I don't know. Look, I don't know her. I went to the website earlier to figure out, well, who's in charge of this. And maybe she's great and she's going to fix everything. All I know is that there's nothing to suggest that the person they have in charge of officiating has experience in that field. And there's nothing to suggest that the people on the field calling the games have any experience calling games, because it looks to me like they've never done it before. It's just awful. Just awful. Okay. Let's do this. Let's move on to Washington. This is obviously a longtime rival. Give me just a few seconds, but some USC-Washington memories, because we played the Huskies for a long time in some really big games. Mark, what do you have? You have some USC-Washington memories for us?
Do I have to remember last year's game?
No, I mean you probably do, but we don't need to talk about it. I know
Not.
I don't want to.
I remember 2016. That's when Sam Darnold and Ronald Jones had a really good offensive game. They stopped a 12-game winning streak. By the way, the Huskies, I think, were ranked number 4 at the time. Adoree Jackson didn't have a great night, but he did come up big when they needed him to. 2012, back then, you had that was against Sark. They won the game 24-14. You had right now, Washington currently owns an 18-game home winning streak on the Husky Stadium field, Chris. I know there was a point of contention.
You called me out because it was a home game. They were the home team, but they didn't play it at home. I got you.
Right. So they're tough at home. They're tough in Seattle when they're playing at Husky Stadium. I know you have another question for another show that we're going to talk about, but that 2016 game, 2012, those two games stick out. I don't want to remember last year because you score 42 points at home. You should win. Somehow they ended up losing.
2016 was a high watermark for Clay Helton as a head coach. It didn't get any better. That was the one time where you look at it and say they're playing an elite program at their place, and USC just went out and outplayed them, outcoached them, outhit them. It was a fantastic performance. The best of Clay Helton's career.
That 2012 game might look like what we see this year. USC generated, I think, 4 turnovers in that game. Again, they stopped an 18-game consecutive home winning streak. Maybe that happens again. Right now, Washington, when they play at Husky Stadium this year, undefeated.
Eric, what do you think? You have any USC-Washington memories that stand out?
The 16 one is the big one for them to go up Adoree Jackson with the 2 interceptions, the defense showing up the way it did, and that was a fun one. And really that run the end of the year, I think that's the game that really sort of jumps out right before the Rose Bowl win on that one. But I think that was big. The other ones are, I mean, what Pete did to them during his time there just mostly rolled them forever. The other ones that stand out are losses. You had like the midweek, I think a Friday night issue with them, and the one that I always Lane Kiffin has developed into what I think is a pretty good coach and is doing well. One of the games that always stands out to me is, I think, 2010, Alan Bradford ran for like 600 yards in that game. Unstoppable in that game. And it was always that sort of thing with him where you had the running game going so well and found a way not to use it when it mattered, and then lost on a last second field goal. And that's not obviously not a great one, but that one always sort of jumps out to me just because right, Alan Bradford was one of those guys that you just love watching play, the kind of story and how he got there and turned into that running back and sort of emerged and all of that. He was always really fun to watch. And when he had a game like that, I think 220, 230 on the ground or something in that one. And Lane just seemed like he could find that kind of running ability and stats and all of that and still lose a tough one at the end. So, but no, the 2016 one was that was a fun one, high energy, tons on the line, and to go play like that in that game was one of the memories of that year for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, the good memory, in addition to the 2016 game, probably my favorite of the USC-Washington games was 1984. That was my second time going to the Coliseum, actually. And Washington came in ranked number 1 in the country. USC was a good team. They went on to win the Rose Bowl that year. They were a good team, not a great team. They'd already been hammered at home by LSU. Washington was the far superior team. Washington drove the length of the field for a touchdown on their first possession and got nothing after that. USC won 16-7. It put them in the Rose Bowl, and actually kept Washington from winning the national title, because Washington finished with only one loss that year and really dominated the season. Don James had one of his best teams. The one that I don't like to think about was the 1990 game. Washington was loaded, Steve Entman and Mark Brunell and just, but that was really a changing of the guard, because USC had won the conference for 3 straight years. They go up to Husky Stadium and just get treated like they were the freshman team. I mean, I think it was 31-0 final, but USC couldn't move the ball an inch. They were just absolutely dominated. So Washington is one of those programs that's been good often enough that there are plenty of those games to look back on where you wish you didn't see it in the first place. But yeah, 1984 is one that I'll never forget. Just a fantastic game from a really gutsy USC team that I think played above themselves that day. Okay, what's the key to beating the Huskies this week? That's the big question. Eric, what is it?
I think it looks a lot like Rutgers. I mean, these two teams played, and it was what, 21-18. Like, it was, and it's away from Husky Stadium, so you have to take that into account. But they're fairly similar in there's a big, tough to tackle, very talented running back that you have to control first and foremost. And if you can do that with Jonah Coleman, which USC could not really do when he was at Arizona last year. Again, I know we don't like to talk about last year's defense, but
hey, we won that one. We can talk about that one.
Sure. So if you can do that, like, that puts you off to a really good start. And then you gotta keep control of the ball. That's it. You have to finish all your drives. You're gonna punt more probably in this one than you did against Rutgers, but you have to flip the field and not turn it over. You have to drive a little bit. You have to rely on the run game on the road, probably a little bit more. But I think you got to play the same kind of game that you did against Rutgers, because in a lot of ways, it's the same type of challenges that Washington has. But tackle Jonah Coleman when you're on defense, hold on to the ball when you're on offense.
Mark, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely want to stop Washington's running game. Jonah Coleman on Arizona versus Alex Grinch's defense versus Jonah Coleman on Washington against Stanton Lynn's run defense. I like USC's chances of improving what they did from a couple years ago. So I'm okay with that part. My concern is, can USC pass the ball downfield against Washington's defense? Number one pass defense in the country. They give up an average of 5 yards per pass. 123 per game. Those are crazy numbers. I don't care who you're playing. I get it. Part of those numbers are based on their schedule, but you're not beating these guys downfield. And that's one of USC's problems right now with their wide receivers, is getting separation. So as long as they can continue to do well with their run defense, don't give up any explosive plays, and can USC's wide receivers get some separation? Can Miller Moss get those 10 and 11 yard pass completions instead of having to rely on the 5 yard pass and the wide receiver, running with the ball to getting the yards after the catch? And then the other thing is, Will Rogers, Washington's quarterback, he's a different player at home. He's like 10 touchdowns to 1 interception when they're playing in Seattle. And he's much different on the road, where he's not as productive. So if you can get him to, I don't know, not feel comfortable, if USC's defensive line, if they can create pressure, get back there and make him feel like he's playing on the road, get the crowd out of it, because that's one of the louder crowd environments in the Pac, in the big conference now. Yeah, USC has a decent chance of winning a 27-23 type of game.
Yeah, look, it's hard to know what to make of this Washington offense, because the individual pieces don't look bad. Will Rogers is a really experienced quarterback. He's played a lot of football over the years. Jonah Coleman is a problem. I mean, he was a problem last year in that game. He looked like the best player on the field for most of the game. And if you look at Washington's offensive statistics, they are very similar to USC's. But as frustrating as USC's offense has been this year, Washington's has been more so, because they have talent, they have a really good head coach, they put up pretty decent yards and yards per play and all that stuff, right? Comparable to USC. But they score about 8 points a game less than USC does. They don't score points, despite the fact they played a much easier schedule with Weber State and Eastern Michigan, Northwestern, Rutgers. I mean, Washington State. They have not played a very good schedule, and they don't score points. Washington's going to move the ball in this game. You can virtually guarantee that, because USC is going to try to stop Jonah Coleman. And unless they have the entire secondary back, they're probably going to play soft. They'll probably play soft anyway, sort of like they did in the first half against LSU, where they gave up a lot of underneath stuff and just counted on getting a stop once LSU got in the red zone. I think you're going to see a lot of that. So don't get frustrated if Washington's able to throw underneath and move the ball. They're going to do that. The question is whether Washington can break out of their scoring slump, because they're going to be in a position to do it. They haven't done it all year. And USC has been pretty good on third down almost all year. They've been pretty good on scoring defense all year. So if the trends hold, USC will hold Washington somewhere in the low to mid 20s. That would be my prediction. The question is, what does USC's offense do on the road? Is the offensive line going to completely fall apart? Is Miller Moss going to throw back-breaking interceptions? I mean, so far this season, the answer to that has been yes to both questions. That's the key to the game. I think we know what we're going to get from USC's defense. They've been relatively consistent for the most part. Maybe not against Minnesota. The run defense wasn't as strong, but that was an anomaly. It was one game. I expect that they'll play physical. I expect they'll play disciplined. They're not going to dominate the game. They don't have the talent to dominate Washington's offense this year. They just don't. But they're going to play sound, and they're going to keep USC's offense in the game. And the question is whether this offensive line and Miller Moss have grown up. And we'll see. I don't know the answer to that. I don't think anybody knows the answer to that, but that's the question. And it'll help if they can get some big plays. I mean, one of the problems with not getting big plays offensively is that it's just too easy to kill your drives, because all it takes is a penalty. And it's hard to have 8, 9, 10 play scoring drives without having a mistake. In the Caleb Williams days, you'd have a lot of 2-play scoring drives, and they'd have drives they'd mess up with mistakes. But most of the time, they didn't have to work that hard, right? With Caleb Williams, you just didn't have to work that hard on offense most of the time. They have to work hard on offense now. It'd be nice if they could get something easy. Mekhi Lemon breaking something, maybe Zachariah Branch breaking something for the first time this year, something for the running backs. They just need that. But I think that's the key. Can they keep from having an offensive meltdown up front and at quarterback is really the question. And it's going to be a tough atmosphere. All right.
I think just to add, you got to be okay if you throw for 175 yards in this game too. I think against you look at what, again, it's home, it's road. Iowa and Indiana, they were comfortable throwing it 19 times, 20 times against Washington and giving it to their running backs over and over and over and just sort of moving it down the field. Washington does not give up big plays. They don't give up 10-yard plays. They don't give up 20-yard plays. They don't give up 40-yard plays. It's just we're at the point in the year where a lot of teams sort of are what they are, and you can do that. And Indiana has been a really good offense this year. Iowa's Iowa, Michigan's Michigan. But there have been some offenses, and they're just not doing that. And I think you have to be comfortable going in chunks of 6 down the field and not let that sort of get you out of your rhythm and try to force something that maybe isn't there.
Yeah, and look, I don't know what to make of Washington's pass defense statistics, because, as you pointed out, They haven't played very many teams who can throw the ball at all. Indiana can throw the ball very well, but they happen to get Indiana with a backup quarterback. So I don't know what to make of that. I think Washington defensively will be a lot like USC defensively. I think they're going to be fundamentally sound. I don't think you're going to have big breakdowns. I think they're going to make you fight for your points. So I think they'll do that. But Steve Entman's not going to be on the field. This is a team you can move the ball and score points against if you play well without the huge breakdowns. I just have no, and that might happen. I'm not saying it won't. I just don't have any confidence yet that this USC offense in a tough environment on the road will hold it together for 60 minutes, because at least since the LSU game, we just haven't seen them do it.
Well, defensively, my concern right now is who are they going to get back in the secondary? Because that could be scary. Right? We see that they've been lucky a couple of times, not giving up big plays, but you can't rely on luck too much.
You really need to get Kamari Ramsey back. I don't know. I mean, Jalen Smith would be. I mean, all of those guys you need. But Kamari Ramsey has probably been your best defensive player this year, apart from Eric Gentry. They need that guy back. It's not that they don't have depth at safety. They have some other good players, but they don't have anybody that plays like Kamari Ramsey. They need him back in a big way. But I don't know. I don't know what information we're going to get on that. Probably none, because I think at this point Lincoln Riley has banned media from being in Los Angeles during practice time. So I guess we'll just have to see what happens Saturday. Okay, score predictions, guys. Let's hear it. Mark Holkin, you go first.
I think I dropped it a few minutes ago. I can see USC eking out a 27-23 type of victory. They're favored by 3 on the road. Over under is 55.5. So yeah, USC ekes out one of those tough, gritty, we're gonna run it, we're gonna score just enough points to get the job done.
Eric?
Yeah, I'm right there too. 24-21. I'm kind of going back, right? Like, I don't know for sure that this is a USC win. I don't know for sure if I trust the offensive line in that environment to play 2 really clean games back to back, and Miller Moss to not throw that pick. I'm gonna say that USC wins a tight one here. This is one of those ones where Washington, a little bit like the Penn State game, and USC played much better against Penn State than I anticipated them playing. Washington kind of gives you problems in the areas where you don't want to see problems right now if you're USC. So it's a tough matchup for them. 24-21, I think they make enough plays.
Yeah, I'm sort of in the same area. I came in before hearing your scores. I was coming in at 26-24. I think this isn't a game where USC is going to get any separation, but I don't think Washington will either. I think USC will play fundamentally sound. Ordinarily, I'd look at, Washington has 14 sacks and 31 tackles for loss this year. Those are pretty average numbers. And so I would like to say that USC should be okay because of that. But we've seen other teams that didn't have big sack numbers really get after Miller Moss. So I don't know what to make of that. If the offensive line holds up, USC should win this game. I think USC has better talent than Washington overall, but Washington is close enough that playing at home, it would not shock me if they win the game. And ultimately, what's going to happen is USC is going to have to make a play at the end of the game to win it. And that hasn't been something they've done very, very often. The defense tends to give up drives when you can't have them give up a drive in the fourth quarter, and the offense tends to screw up when when you have the ball and you just need to pick up 2 first downs, they can't do it. So they're going to have to reverse those trends. I'm going to pick USC to win, but my level of confidence from 1 to 100 is 1 on that prediction. I don't know how it could be otherwise in light of what we've seen. Okay, guys, that's it. Anything you want to say before we sign off? I mean, every week I give you this opportunity. This is where you can be creative and really build your brand. Come on, McKinney.
I put all my effort into prepping for your show so that I'm at the best for you.
You know what? I appreciate that. I don't believe it, but I appreciate it.
I'm going to submit my resume for the big conference head of officials. That's
Hey, I'd take it. You can't possibly do worse than what we've seen this year. Okay, well, I guess that's it. We're done. Thanks for joining us, and hopefully we have another big USC win this week. This is a big one. They win this one, they really do have a chance to finish the year with a successful season. I can't even say it. My body won't even let me say the word, a successful season. All right, until next week, fight on, everybody.